Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Heather Denniston, and with me today is Reid Kuther over at Phenix Physical Therapy in Issaquah. Good friend, but first a good colleague and referral person that I used to refer to all the time when I was in practice. So thank you for coming on the show today. I totally appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and when I thought about, hey, we need to do a show on footwear and feet and brands and how to buy shoes, you were the person that popped into my head. So this is perfect. You've got tons of experience in this area. You've got some great content for us today. So stick around, guys, because we are going to be talking about everything to do with going to buy your next pair of shoes and what you need to know about it, because there are some surprises in what we're going to talk about today. Am I right?
We are right.
Yes. Excellent. So, Reid, I want to hear a little bit about your background and what landed you at Phenix Physical Therapy as an end result. So share with us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. I got interested in physical therapy when my twin sister tore her ACL our senior year of high school. Just kind of, introduced to the profession as far as an opportunity to work with athletes in Issaquah, dancers in New York City, high school kids in Wyoming, wherever you want to go, there's an opportunity to work. So that job security was kind of beneficial and attractive to me. So started my career at a clinic that was affiliated with the Seahawks in Kirkland, and then moved to work with the orthopedic group here in Issaquah. And then just established my own clinic. As far as working as busy as I was, I thought, why not work for myself? So here we are about 4.5 years later at Phenix. And we do specialize, at least I have specialized over the course of my career, in foot and ankle treatments. I've worked really closely with a lot of the foot and ankle docs, both podiatry and orthopedic surgeons here in town. So have a really good keen sense of doing custom orthotics, biomechanical analysis, and those sorts of things. So,
and I've been a personal beneficiary of both custom orthotics and some Achilles tendonitis treatment. And so thank you for that, because I wouldn't be able to be jumping rope and doing the things that I do now if it weren't for your loving care. So thank you for that. And then as a professional, as a chiropractor, I referred over to you for lots of things, but often my most difficult cases, you just have a knack. So you are gifted at what you do. And I'm so glad you're doing your own thing. And I cannot believe it's been 4.5 years. That's just crazy talk over there. And so that's really fun. And you have a couple of practitioners underneath you as well.
We're up to myself and 3 others now. So Julie Barron, Katie McCurry, and Vivian Sow is here with us. So we're growing, and we're excited to do that as far as getting the brand out and the services we provide.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're talking about feet today. We've got all sorts of angles that we're going to talk about. One of the things that I think happens is, I do a lot of sort of things online and on Instagram and on Facebook, and I'm constantly seeing, I think of Kaisa Fit, who constantly is showing her latest running shoe that she got, and then people want to run out and get that one. And I think there's a lot of sort of misconceptions socially about form versus fashion. And so I'd like you to speak about people going, oh, that's the latest brand I'm seeing online. Is that the one I should go and get? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the important thing to think about is that, especially if you're a runner, shoes are not an accessory. It's not a handbag. So just because it works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for you, right? So you need to take into account, I think, the 3 S's, your foot structure, your foot shape, and then your running style. How do you run and where do you run? Those things really matter in picking the right shoe for what you're going to ask that piece of integral equipment to do for you.
Yeah, I love that you say shoes are not a handbag, because you see it out there. I mean, you look at any of sort of the big influencers, they've got a different shoe for every single Lululemon pair of pants that they have. So I think that's really, really good advice to stick with. So if that's the case, then let's start. You mentioned foot structure. Let's start with that. I can tell you, I have the craziest lumpy, bumpy feet from old ankle sprains and all sorts of stuff. So not everyone has the same foot structure. What do you see as far as a starting point for shoes based on foot structure? What do we need to know?
Well, I think there's a few things, and from my lens, I'm seeing this clinically, of course, right? People who have injuries or have some sort of a pain pattern. So perfect feet don't always make their way into my clinic. So there's 2 things that kind of happen beyond the perfect neutral foot. So we kind of look at the foot model here. If it's sitting on just a flat surface, if it's in a right neutral position, it can stand on its own. This is not propped up. This is just sitting here. But if we look at the actual foot structure, there are 2 things that happen. And we hear the terms all the time, pronation and supination.
Yes.
I think it's really important to remember that both of those things are normal. We're meant to pronate and we're meant to supinate. The problems happen when we either pronate when we're meant to be supinating, or we supinate when we're meant to be pronating. They need to happen at the right time, and they need to happen in the right excursion or amounts of motion, right? So we'll see people talk about overpronation, and we look at that, and the pronation is really when the arch is starting to go toward the floor or the ground, right?
Yes.
Pronation is when that arch is coming up away from the ground. So we also classify those as pronated people being a flat arch, or pancake foot, right? Or the supinated being that high arch, or we call it cavus foot in the clinic. So when you're seeing those things happen in the wrong timing, that's, I think, where things need to be looked at. So if we think about kind of that normal tripod stance, we want to be standing where our big toe, little toe, and middle of the heel are on the ground. And that's where things are going to be really stacked up above that. The knee's going to be in the right position, the hip will be in the right position, and everything's great. But what we see is that people will start to do those things in the wrong time. So if we think about normal mechanics, we're meant to strike the ground in a supinated position, which is more of a high arched posture.
Okay.
Once we talk about how you push off, but as immediately when you strike the ground, you're meant to go into some pronation, where you unlock the midfoot and have better shock absorption. You're going to adapt to the ground surface that you're standing on. Let's say there's a rock or a tree root, your foot's a little bit more flexible to adapt to that ground surface. As you start to progress your body weight toward push off, we should start to see that supination, or that arch, coming away from the ground to create more rigidity in this midfoot, so that when you push off, you have a nice, good, rigid lever arm. It's really efficient gait, and you have a better power propulsive stance on the ground.
Okay.
So the analogy I like to use when somebody is, say, pronating when they should be pushing off is like walking in dry sand. We all know what that feels like. We're not very efficient. It takes a lot more energy. It's pushing off of that really flexible foot when we really want to be in that rigid position.
Yeah.
The opposite's true too. When somebody strikes the ground and they don't pronate, they stay in that supinated high arch position. That's a really rigid foot that can't absorb any of that shock. So that shock and ground reaction force goes right up into the chain. The knee takes the hit, the hip takes the hit, or even the low back can take the hit.
Huh.
So super important for those things to happen in the right position.
So structurally, we have to think. The couple of things that I love that you just said is pronation and supination are normal. Mm-hmm. It's when they're being done at the wrong phase of gait, or if they are too excessive in either direction. Did I get that right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So I think if we can look at what causes, maybe say, let's start with pronation. And what I see in the clinic more often than not, there's a couple things that I think can happen if we just consider the foot. And we'll talk about other things a little bit later. But if we look at the foot, the rear foot is kind of a different functional section than the forefoot. And I see a lot of times in the clinic, people will come in and their forefoot, instead of being in this nice, good tripod stance, their forefoot has been positioned to be in an upward angle. So when you put your foot on the ground, the immediate thing you have to do is roll forward to get that big toe down. This big toe is big for a reason. We want to push off the big toe to get that force power from the calf muscle and the glutes. So if that big toe's down on the ground, we're not going to get a lot of good force out of that. So we have to roll down. Well, now all of a sudden we're creating, again, that flexible foot, right?
Yeah.
So, and there are things that we can do with a shoe. There are things we can do with an insert that will correct for that. But if somebody is structurally positioned like that, they don't really have a chance unless they're on a surface that's going to match that angle.
Yeah, that makes sense. So over time, do structural issues like alter foot shape and longevity of kind of foot mechanics and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think a great example of that is somebody who is in that overpronated position. As they're rolling in and going to push off, they're going to get kind of a rotatory motion. And what we tend to see is they start to push off, and all of a sudden we see that bunion. Sticking way out. Well, that can be prevented if we catch that early enough with a better supportive shoe or better supportive orthotic. And I think in general, pronated feet tend to run a little bit more wide because they're splayed out. Those toes kind of stink out. Whereas that foot, while it may act a little bit more narrow, you get that super high arch, and then you get that person who's got that callus or that kind of big bony lump here because of the force at the big toe, and then how the rubbing in at the arch of a shoe or the midfoot of the shoe. It just changed the way a shoe even fits, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think we've all probably, anybody over 40 or 50, your feet do change for sure. And so I do think it's really important to kind of stay aware of it. And correct me if I'm not right about this, but I feel like when I was much younger, I was a heavy pronator, and now actually you help me identify I'm actually more of a supinator now. And I imagine those changes can happen throughout your existence. Yeah.
They sure can. And other things, like different hormonal influence. We certainly see in pregnancy, the foot becomes more lax because of the relaxin released in the system. So anybody who's kind of a pronator is going to be an overpronator pretty quickly because of the integral system of the foot. Those static stabilizers are now a little bit weaker, which can change. There's a lot of women who after giving birth will have a half a shoe size different that doesn't come back. So interesting. Because of that foot.
Yeah. So, I know I remember in anatomy thinking about how many bones are in the foot, and you just think about all of that articulation all has the opportunity to go wrong.
Yep.
And so it's a very, very complicated structure. And so I think it's great that there are folks like you that can help us unwind for ourselves, like if knee or hip issues, we're going to get into that a little bit later, but going down to the base and taking a look at feet, even if it's not a foot specific problem, I think is super essential as well. Yeah.
Right. And clinically, patients say, oh, I've had that callus for years, not a big deal. Well, that's a great story for us. If there's a callus where we don't expect thickened skin, that means your body is putting pressure through an area that is not designed to take that, right? So calluses aren't necessarily normal. You look at mechanics, and those feet look great on the bottom, right? Somebody who's rolling in and doing that bunion, you get a big callus on the side of that big toe. That tells us a story. Same with shoe wear, with what you've been wearing, right?
I look a lot at that in chiropractic practice is when you look at lateral shoe wear or just kind of how the shoe itself is breaking down. And you certainly have much more experience in that than I did, but even that was helpful from a chiropractic standpoint to look at alignment up the chain. So I think that was great. So let's talk. I definitely want to spend some time on brands, because that's the thing that I think a lot of people are really interested in, because it is a murky pond to try to figure out what shoe is good for you. And so I know you've got some shoes to show us, and I would love for you to share that. I know what I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything on those notes. And it's just that, two things. One is people get stuck into a brand and they buy that brand for the rest of their life. And that may be good or not good. I'd love you to speak to that. Mm-hmm. And then also, I think people, like we referred to earlier, they're jumping around to the latest, most highly advertised shoe without considering what the shoe's doing for them. So let's hit on some brands and talk a little bit about that so people can get clearer.
Yeah, I think, when we look at kind of high mileage runners or people who really want to be serious about running, there's a few brands I think that are a bit better designed, and they're really the companies that are not so diverse that they're doing a bunch of apparel and athletic equipment. They're really just doing shoes. They're putting a lot of research and development into that shoe. So the main brands that we recommend typically on our list would be Asics, Brooks, New Balance. Hoka is a new one that's kind of come out in the last few years. That's been a really good shoe. There's Mizuno, there's Saucony. There's a bunch of good brands. I think when I'm in the clinic, I rarely, unless somebody has a really unique foot shape, all of those brands have a different sort of shaped last. Asics can run a little bit more narrow than, say, a Brooks or a New Balance. So I think if somebody needs that narrow fit, there's better shoes for them than others.
Yeah.
Shoes come in wides and narrows and things like that too. But I really like to focus more on the category of the shoe, because as long as you're in the right category, so the people, for example, that will say, oh, I love Brooks. They'll talk about they've worn all three different categories of Brooks with no discerning choice over which category they really need to be in. So yeah, brand is one thing. That's, I think, important for a shoe fit perspective. And performance, they all have their different proprietary, different materials that they're putting in. Like Asics likes a gel material. Brooks calls theirs a DNA, kind of a rebound springy material. Hoka has more of a cushion. One of their shoes we'll talk about has a little marshmallow feel, they call it. So they all have different proprietary designs, and that may feel better for some than others. And I'm not really interested in telling somebody what they're going to feel, but I want to put them in the right category for function.
Okay, so and can I stop you? When you say category, what do you mean by that?
So there's three main categories of running shoes. There's a neutral, or we'll call it a cushion shoe. There's a stability shoe, and then there's a motion control. And so if we look at a few of each of these. So if we look at, say, Brooks here to start, this is the Brooks Ghost. This is going to be a neutral shoe. And if you look at that shoe from behind, you're going to see, if I keep that right and straight and narrow here, there's not a lot of difference between the outside of the heel and the inside of the heel, right? So This is going to take you and just be a neutral guide. It's going to absorb shock. It's going to be a cushion version, but it's not going to try to control your foot a whole lot, other than just having a nice, good supportive last, right? If you go up into the next category called the stability shoe, you're going to get a little bit more control on the inside. So it's a different density material on the inside of this heel counter than there is on the outside. So this, and you'll get it from the back again, you're going to see it's kind of built up a little bit more on this inside edge to kind of prevent or decelerate that pronation coming through that rear foot heel strike into the push off. This is the Brooks Adrenaline. This is kind of a cool thing. I just learned this yesterday, thanks to Elizabeth down at Plateau Runner here in Issaquah. This is the Adrenaline GTS, and the GTS stands for go-to shoe. This is one of their best-selling shoes on the market as far as a stability shoe.
Oh, interesting.
That was kind of a cool thing. I didn't know that. So,
okay, so let me just, I want to say that again. So first of all, Plateau Runners is an amazing place to go. We'll touch on that in a minute, but just if you guys are local, Plateau Runners is incredible. So stability shoes, are they geared primarily toward those who overpronate then? Is that?
Yes, with a big asterisk at the end of that. So yes, they are. They're meant to, again, decelerate pronation as somebody strikes their heel, because it's built up more in this inner heel counter. It's going to try to slow down that arch dropping toward the ground. If we step back to the talking about people that present with that forefoot structural deformity, it's going to kind of miss the boat for those folks, because there's nothing really built up here in the forefoot, which where shoes have kind of missed the boat a little bit. I see it more clinically in the forefoot than rear foot. Not that doesn't happen, but sometimes we put somebody in this shoe, we brought the rear foot back up, but now that forefoot's even further away from the ground. Then they have to really work hard to get down. So folks that, in orthotics without forefoot posting, and we'll talk about that, haven't really worked for them. But yes, it's really designed to kind of decelerate pronation. So, and it can work in folks who are just kind of moderate overpronators. The severe folks, there's another shoe on the market, and that's called for the men, it's called the Brooks Beast. And it's named appropriately. So if you look at the medial side of this shoe, we've got a really big plastic truss here. To really control that pronation. Look again from the back side, we've got this really big built up position here on the inside. This isn't gonna let you go anywhere. Super stiff, really decelerates those overpronators quite a bit. And again, if it's back here, I think it does a great job. If it's out here, I think we need to do something a little bit different, and we can talk about that as we go along.
So is that a control? Can you name the three things again? Neutral, stability, and control?
Yeah, motion control.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so that is the most stiff shoe that somebody's going to get.
The men's version is the Beast and Brooks. The women's is called the Ariel, and they're designed very similarly, just a little different fit for men's and women's foot shapes.
I hope y'all caught that. Ariel and Beast, hello, for any of you animated fans. Okay.
That's it. Then if we look at, I have a couple of New Balance options just to kind of look at a different design and different materials. So this is the neutral New Balance called the 860. Again, we're just looking at more of a neutral position, same density on the inside and the outside. What I like about the New Balance, they've kind of done a cool thing. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this, but this is their stability shoe, which is the 880. And if we look at the outside, let me see if I can get that. Those dimples are kind of indented.
Yes.
If we look at the inside, those dimples are pushing out.
Yeah.
Right. So on the outside, it's going to let that kind of crush down a little bit, where in the inside, it's going to control and kind of keep that position upward, which is again going to keep that heel from rolling in.
Yeah.
Kind of a cool little feature.
Based on what you're showing us even so far, it sounds to me like the most common issue is people rolling in too much, and that's where shoe manufacturers are trying to stabilize more than somebody rolling out or over supinating. Is that true?
I think the majority of problems are going to be a pronatory problem or somebody who does overpronate. There are people who are way in that supinated foot position that if you put them in a motion control shoe because their foot is in that outward position, if you feel like you're going to help stabilize that, what we're doing is keeping them from any shock absorption. And it's a motion control shoe, which has a little bit less cushioning. It has some, to be fair, but those folks need to be in that cushion neutral shoe where they get the shock absorption out of the shoe wear.
Yeah.
Kind of control what the foot does either through an insert or just through exercise or whatnot, stretching, those sorts of things. So yeah, I think the majority are going to be more of the pronation problems.
Okay. It seems like if the product tells a story, it's that they're focusing on that a little bit. So
yeah. And gravity's free. So if we think about it's less likely we're going to develop a problem going into supination. Gravity's going to push us down over time. We're going to lose stability of the integrity of the arch. We're going to start to become pronators is more typical.
Yeah, more typical. Okay.
So I got a couple other shoes here. And again, thanks to Plateau Runner for allowing us to have these on hand.
Yeah. No, they're awesome.
Yeah.
We're going to get into kind of, I think we don't have this specifically as a question, but how to find a shoe store that is going to help you, because you can't all be foot specialists. So, how do you find a place that isn't just trying to, sell their most expensive shoe versus actually fit you with the right shoe? So we'll talk about that in a minute.
Right. The Hoka has been one that's going to come on the market, and they look like big clunky shoes, and they're actually very, very light despite how they look here. I think there's a note that women's size 7 is only 8.6 ounces, and this is the what is the one Bondi? This one here. Well, this is the Clifton, sorry, this is the Bondi. So they're very light, even though they look like they have a lot of cushion, and they do. They're really, in fact, this one here is called the Marshmallow shoe as far as its ability to really cushion and kind of have a really neutral platform. And you sit kind of deeper in the shoe. It looks like you might be a little bit higher up, but it's a really good shoe for that. And they have a running shoe here for their racers called the Carbon X. It's got a carbon fiber plate in there, but you can kind of see through those little holes. Yeah. Which is really, really stiff. And this thing doesn't move. So you're getting a really propulsive ride. If you're out there on a race, say a half marathon, there's been a lot of people breaking records in this shoe lately. So it's something.
Is that right? So we don't have time to go into this today, but we're veering really far off the path of any kind of minimalist or sort of barefoot concept. That should be another thing that we talk about, because I'm sure you got lots of comments and
yeah,
about that. But
that's, I think, another thing to consider versus the category. Then you've got those sorts of things. So I do have one of those. This is called the Ultra. This is what we call the zero drop. So we talk a lot about minimalist shoe, zero drop, low drop. So this is 0. If you think about drop, what they're referring to is the distance and the height of the heel in relation to the height of the toe box. So if we look at, say, a shoe like this, you can kind of see that the heel is built up a little bit more than the toe, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to get a little bit, usually between 8 to 10 millimeters is a normal heel drop from the heel counter toward the forefoot. The Ultras is a 0. So it's going to be a flat surface from the heel to the forefoot. Also an anatomically designed footbed. So your foot can fit in there instead of having a tapered toe box such as that.
I see.
More chance to spread and feel the ground a little bit more. Which is a great thing. The hard, these we have to be careful with some folks who, let's say, they work a high professional job and they're in high heels all day, and then they try to run in an Ultra. We have to really work on calf length, make sure we don't develop Achilles tendonitis because of the change in the heel drop and the push off now at a tightened calf.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And always what I talk to people about is, you've been walking on concrete, you've been in shoes your whole life, and to suddenly switch to a minimalist shoe or no shoe and put a demand on your foot that it's not used to. There is a very particular transition sort of series of steps you want to go through that should be managed by somebody like you. So if you are, if you are a competitive runner and you're like, hey, I want to start to move toward this, book an appointment with Reid, have him evaluate and start to work you toward that in a healthy, non-injurious way.
Right. I think, and to fair point to that, Heather, it's exactly right, because the 0 drops are going to really promote somebody to be a midfoot to forefoot striker when you're running, versus something like this, which is going to promote more of that rear foot strike. So it changes the way you actually run a little bit based on the shoe design and how it's going to create function for you. So
for sure.
Yeah, those are things to absolutely consider.
So since we're just kind of right there, Plateau Runners is somewhere that you have been a super big fan of. And when I was in practice with you, we also, what was the name of the place that closed that used to do the great?
Foot Zone was here.
Foot Zone used to be great. They really geared toward, and I know Plateau Runners does, geared toward the health professionals in the community who are evaluating feet and looking at gait and casting orthotics, and they work together with you, which is really great. So I will say, and I'm not naming a store, but we went into a running store down here in Arizona, and there were a ton of bells and whistles. There was 3D foot photography. There was all sorts of different things. And I can't say I knew positively or negatively whether I thought it was valid kind of data they were collecting or whether it was kind of like a show. Right. And so can you tell me, if I'm somebody who's lay and I don't know anything about feet and I've been wearing the same shoe forever, but now I think it's not a good fit for me, how do I find a store that I think is going to help me get the best fit and the best shoe?
Sure. I think, if you walk into a shoe store and they're looking at a static stance as far as telling you what shoe you should wear based on how you're standing, I think that's a good red flag to kind of find the next place. It kind of harkens to that. There's a brand out there that has those plates and, Fred Meyer or pharmacies where you just get to stand. I'll tell you which over-the-counter insert you should be pulling off. And there's so many reasons why people pronate, and there's so many reasons why weight bearing might be more toward the medial foot that a weight plate sensor can only tell you so much, right? So you can watch somebody walk. So I think treadmills in shoe stores is a great idea. I think as long as the staff is looking more from just the shin down, they're kind of keeping in mind what's going on up above, because that's a really important piece to how somebody would walk. And again, the training of the staff, if they're, kind of like you don't go to an Italian restaurant that says red sauce and noodles, They call it pasta. So if they're using the right terms, they're talking about what you're doing, they're asking about your history. What have you worn before? What's worked? Let me see your shoe pattern. Those are all things I think that a well-trained staff is going to do. And certainly at Plateau Runner, we send folks down there quite a bit, and we use their trifold, which I really like because they kind of put the shoes in that category in the grid. And there's a lot of folks that do this, right? So they'll tell you, neutral, the stability and the motion control. And I like to recommend a category. I think they're really good about fitting a foot for the shoe lasted shape versus, I can do the function here and they can do kind of the fit there. And they do a really great job. We've been super pleased with them. So finding that kind of place that has that sort of staff is really important.
Yeah, I think that's huge, is getting a sense that the staff have been regularly trained by an expert and given them the tools they need to fit you correctly with the right shoe. Yeah. And I think that's key. We'll put the information for Plateau Runners down below, guys. And I believe they are giving us a 10% discount up until January 8th. Is that right?
Yeah. So if you walk into the store and say you watch the the live broadcast here on Well Fit and Fed, they're going to give you a 10% discount on a shoe pair that you buy.
Excellent. So, okay, that's great.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about foot structure and foot shape. We've talked a little bit about branding. Let's talk about the fact that feet sometimes are a symptom of something that's happening up above. And so as a physical therapist, what are you looking at? What are you looking for when someone comes in and they're like, I've got this major foot problem? You're not going to just microscopically look at the foot. What are you going to do?
Yeah, it's funny. I joke around with patients all the time when they come in for an eval for their foot. I'll say, I'm going to get to your foot at some point. It's not going to be right away. And but there's so many other things that I think fit into it, like you say, and somebody who's coming in with say a significant hip weakness that lets the whole chain roll inward when they load, that foot doesn't have a chance. The muscles around the foot that control pronation, supination, if you look at surface area, are about that big in terms of the surface area of the perineals on one side and the posterior tib on the other side. If you look at the surface area of the glutes, it's a little bit bigger. We have a better chance of controlling the limb up top.
And some more than others.
A little more than others. There are some weak glutes out there too, that's for sure. And folks, if you're weak and you're coming in and your foot just doesn't have a chance, it's pronating, I can put a great shoe in there. I can put an orthotic in there, but it's not really going to solve the problem. In fact, there's been plenty of folks along my career that have been sent in for an orthotic assessment that we'll put that on the back burner until we have rehabbed the rest of the chain to look at back stability, glute strength, kind of knee control. And it goes both ways. If the foot is a pronated foot, it's going to take that tibia, somebody who goes down to that lowered arch position, the whole tibia rolls in with it. So that knee position is going to be different. Your patellar tracking is going to be different. So we might be seeing somebody for patellar tendonitis when it's really a pronation problem or a glute med problem. So you need to look at the whole chain. Flexibility. I mean, people pronate all the time because the calf is too tight. If you can't progress your shin over your foot because there's tightness in the structures behind it, you're going to get there somehow. And usually it's through that midfoot because it just, again, doesn't have the chance to stabilize.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's such a great explanation. Thank you for that. That's awesome. So, I'm going to switch the questions. My last question is going to be what's a tip to walk away with? But I have two more questions. One is orthotics. So there's obviously, there's a wide range. There's everything from something you can buy off the store, a Superfoot or a Soulfoot or whatever, you can find there in the drugstore, all the way to a $500 pair of casted orthotics that you would do. So can you just briefly talk people through when they should be progressing, more toward a professionally casted orthotic?
I think it depends on where the problem is. I think there's some really good options on the market that will deal with rear foot issues or just kind of generalized, we call them arch supports, and we really shouldn't. The arch is meant to be a suspensory structure. We don't want to jam material up into that arch because you want that to be a transition zone, not a loaded zone, right? Kind of like those loading zone parking spaces only. Get off that really quickly. We don't want to sit there and wait for that arch. That's plantar fasciitis will happen, kind of midfoot breakdown will happen. So there's some that on the market that'll deal. I have a couple, just an example here of a sole support. It's got a good, this is kind of a semi-custom because you can heat this up in the oven and then stand on it in a nice neutral position to kind of mold to your foot a little bit. But again, we want to be careful. We're not just jamming something up into that arch. It's not meant for that. Superfeet's another good one that'll give some support and some deceleration to pronation. But those folks that have that problem toward the forefoot, there just really isn't anything on the market yet that's addressing that. And we can kind of create some different posting, but I like to do custom orthotics for those folks. And they'll be the ones who have come in and said, I've tried orthotics. It was so sore in my arch, I just couldn't take it. And if we didn't address the forefoot problem by putting a post, this one's kind of hard to see because it's black on black, but here's a little post out here that's going to be a little thicker on the inside of this orthotic and goes down on the outside. It's going to help to bring the ground up to that forefoot so you don't have to roll so far to push your big toe down to the ground and push off. And those folks tend to be like, this feels like the best thing since sliced bread as far as now we finally address the problem and we take the weight off the arch, taking the stress off the plantar fascia for whatever reason we're doing orthotics. So I think it does come down to an assessment. You can certainly, the over-the-counter ones are a cheaper alternative. Folks that spend, I don't charge nearly that much. I don't charge $500 for orthotics. I think, basically charge the cost to get them. I think the service is more toward the assessment and kind of putting somebody on the right path. But I think the custom is worth the value if the problem isn't necessarily solved by the over-the-counter options.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. So, Reid, I just want to say before we finish with our last question, Phenix Physical Therapy is in Issaquah in the, it's not the Highlands building.
Building.
Issaquah Medical Building by the post office if you are a local. And amazing PT, and not just feet, all sorts of assessments. We've done other shows. We did a fantastic other show that I will also link down below, that we talked about kind of how to age gracefully and lots of different great stuff. So read your wealth of information. And I do hope people who are local will follow up with you and come and see you at your great clinic. And I thank you so much for being here. So as a last option, what are one or two or one tip that you want people to walk away from having talked about all this footwear stuff?
I think it'd be a phrase that I say a lot that my staff is probably tired of hearing me say, but it's really function before fashion. I think if we could take people, I hate shoe stores that have mirrors. I think it's great to look, how does this look with my pants? That looks great. We really should be trying shoes on in the dark. It's really about how they feel, right? But get yourself in the right category first, kind of know what your foot structure and shape is. Get to the right brand that's going to fit that, and then really try it on in the dark. It shouldn't be about the color. Again, it's not a handbag. Yeah. To match your outfit, really. I mean, get your pants to match your shoe if you need to do that, but make sure you're in the right shoe first, and it has to feel right. And again, that's where I don't really necessarily say what brand. Just go and try them all on in the cushion category if that's what we're trying to recommend, and just one fits best for you. What design or proprietary materials do you like the best? So I think that's one of the biggest ones for me. And again, if you're having pain, or if you're just starting off as a new runner, or if you're coming back from injury as a runner, I would really suggest having that assessment done. Both Katie and I do video gait analysis here in the clinic, where we'll take somebody on the treadmill, videotape them running for a good period of time from the back and from the side. We can slow that down to a slow motion, frame by frame, even a still shot, looking at different angles of the pelvis and loading, where the knee's hitting, where the foot's actually striking in the ground relative to their base of support. All those things are really important. Say for example, somebody's really stiff in the big toe, they may be pushing off more at midfoot. And those are those folks you see that are really vertical runners, right? If you go to the gym, now's a great time because all the treadmills are going to be taken up for the next 5 days. A whole bunch of different running styles. Some people are up and down. Some people are really smooth. Some people have a lot of weird things going on. All of those folks are running differently because of some sort of, well, the ones who are running well, they're doing well, right? But the ones who are kind of the dysfunctional ones, or something in the system's not working right, because if we could run right, we would. Yeah. But we cheat around a lot of things all the time.
We are innately built to run. So if we have the structure and the function physiology to do it correctly, we'll do it correctly. That's great. That is a great point to leave on. So thank you so much for being with us. I so appreciate it. And as always, guys, the Junk You Should Know Show always airs on Friday at noon PST on the Well Fit and Fed Facebook page, but it lives forever on the YouTube channel for Well Fit and Fed. So if you have not, go over there and subscribe to that. And you will see Reid again because I can't not have him on the show. He's got too much great stuff to share. So thank you so much, Reid, and stay on for a minute so I can thank you properly. And everybody else, whether you watch live or in replay, I love you all, and we will see you again next time.
Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome. Thank you.